Welcome to the Subjective Professor podcast, where we reject coercion and hypocrisy. It is Tuesday, August 12th, 2025, and it's episode 462. And we're going to talk about Philadelphia Eagles culture again, and related to unrepentant political radicals. Anyway, I think that once the school year begins, since I'll be teaching a different subject at a different school, I won't have the benefit of having done it before. And so I'll be spending a lot of time on classroom prep. I think I have four different preps. And if you're familiar with teaching, every class that's different, that has a different subject, they call that a prep. So I have one prep that has three sections, three different classes, three different sections of the same class, and then I have three other classes I have to teach, which all have different preps. So I think this might be a little bit difficult in the beginning, and once I get into the rhythm, I think I won't worry about making episodes. But yeah, just I don't know how that's going to go. So we'll sort of try to play it by ear. Anyway, so Philadelphia Eagles, yeah. So I live in the Philadelphia greater area, and so I'm constantly in my feed, my news feed. There's stories about former Eagles players trying to get back on the team right after they took a free agent contract on another team. And then you have a lot of current players who are trying not to get traded away so that they can stay on the team. They're even taking a big salary cut. Then you see the comparisons of the pay of star players here on this team with a single star player on another team. And it's all to promote this idea that there is an Eagles culture. And because of that culture, they're really disciplined, and that's why they're winning, right? And so it's an interesting storyline, enough that I'll click on a story once in a while to try to figure out which player they're talking about. So, and then in this neighborhood, basically in this general, metropolitan area, uh, it's discussed as if it's something special, right? So the team culture is special, the city is special, right? And so a lot of this sort of unique line of promotion, right? Oh, we're so unique. That's why we're so awesome. People in the world will trash us like Philly fans are the worst, but we're unique. We're special. And that's why we have this awesome team. And, there's all this identity construction going on. But I want to focus on this phenomena of players trying to get on this team. Now, I can imagine that this is something, and I haven't done any research, but I think it's pretty obvious that any team that is on a winning tear or that is on the verge of having a dynasty or is in the middle of a dynasty, I think you see the same thing. I think you see some players valuing winning more important than a bigger, fatter salary. And so they're going to say, hey, look, I'll take a big pay cut so I can stay on a winning team. And you still have other players, though, who are like, yeah, I experienced winning. Now I want to make some money, right? And so you have those players as well. And I think I would imagine that there are a bunch of former Eagles players who made that choice. And so I said before, uh, the culture of the time is the culture of winning. So, for example, if they had won by having over the top egos, people fighting for a higher salary, then that would be the culture that is now protected at the team. But because they won with this very humble, modest, disciplined kind of culture, then that's what's going to be protected. So I'm sure like the New England Patriots or uh, what is it? Dallas Cowboys. If you're winning, people want to be on that winning team. Okay. And so that's what I think is not so surprising, but it's an example of subjectivity, right? So the perspective with a perspective, there are certain assumptions that are made. And because of the subjectivity, because of the way that you're looking at things, with the assumptions that you have, you are going to make certain conclusions. Other people, not with necessarily with the same subjective perspective, but given the same parameters, they're going to make similar conclusions. In other words, I think that, and I didn't live in New England. I don't live in Dallas, but I'm sure that a team that has a dynasty that's winning a lot, you'll see people making the same arguments like, oh, it's our culture that is leading to all of these victories. I'm pretty sure that if I did the research and I looked at the newspaper headings, titles, then you'll see something there, right? And so patterns repeat. Like not all of the moving parts are going to be the same, but we're human beings. And so we operate along similar lines. And so eventually you're going to see patterns, right? And so the shapes and the people, the actors, the components, they may be different, but the pattern is similar. And part of this pattern of saying how, oh, we have a culture of discipline, that's why we're winning, right? When you come up with something like that, there is no consideration of other people, other people's experiences, because people only know themselves. They, even their memory is colored by their present, right? By their present existence, then you're going to selectively choose certain memories to be more prominent than others. And especially if you've never experienced a dynasty type atmosphere, then everything will be new, right? You won't say, oh yeah, I remember it was like this, 10 years ago. No, you don't have that, right? And so you're not familiar with the pattern, but once you start experiencing certain things you'll say, oh, this is the first that's ever happened, right? It's a very common thing that you'll hear people say. But once you do experience it, it becomes recognizable, right? So when you see the pattern in other cities, when you see the pattern in other aspects of life, then you begin to recognize it for what it is. Now, not to take anything away, there is a certain euphoria and excitement, and also the eventual disappointment, right? And that is all part of the pattern. So even positive emotions that currently a lot of Philadelphia Eagles fans experience, you can also then remember, and it's usually forgotten, all of the hate that usually was thrown on the Eagles and also was projected from Eagles fans, right? Like the Dallas Cowboys or the New York Giants or whatever. And so other teams' success caused a lot of extreme stress here in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia area. And so, you can kind of see this dynamic play out. It's how you build rivalries, it's how you promote even people's attitudes towards war, I suppose. But rather than go all the way to war, be more towards the root of, this thinking, this subjective thinking. And it's related to something else that I've been thinking about for a while, and that is the unrepentant, argumentative person. Whether it's the person on the left or the right, it doesn't really matter, but it's that unrepentant, argumentative person. They always think that they're right and they're going to shove those ideas down your throat. And it's like, dude, I know what you're saying. You don't understand what I'm saying, right? And so why are people like this? There's something that, and if you're listening to this channel and these episodes, then I would imagine that you sense that at the least, or you're familiar with what I'm talking about, right? And so this idea came up again when I was talking from my ex-roommate or my roommate, former roommate from college. And it came up in our conversation why some people, it's just not fun to talk to them. You're glad to see them, but it's not fun to talk to them. While with other people, you can talk forever, right? And it's not even that you are making assertions or saying, yeah, yeah, you got to believe this too, or let's go out there and force other people to agree with it. It's not like that at all. In fact, the conversation, because it doesn't have that definitive, yeah, this is the truth, and everyone else has to come to the truth. How do we make other people come to the truth? Because it's not like that. You can talk about a lot of different things, have a really wide-ranging discussion without really getting angry and upset at any point in the conversation. So I thought about this, and what do you even type in the search bar to come up with, I don't know, whatever it is that other people are thinking. So I forget what I typed in, but I got this one article that I'm going to use sort of as uh, an illustration and therefore sort of clarify what I'm trying to say. The title is Why Liberals Aren't as Tolerant as They Think. The political left might consider itself more open-minded than the right, but research shows that liberals are just as prejudiced against conservatives as conservatives are against liberals. And this is by Matthew Hudson with a T, Hudson, and it was published in May 9th, 2017. I forget what the website was, but I thought I wrote it down, but I did not. All right, so I'll read a couple quotes and then I'll share my thoughts. Are conservatives more prejudiced than liberals or vice versa? Research over the years has shown that in industrialized nations, social conservatives and religious fundamentalists possess psychological traits, such as the valuing of conformity and the desire for certainty, that tend to predispose people towards prejudice. Meanwhile, liberals and non-religious tend to be more open to new experiences, a trait associated with lower prejudice. So one might expect that whatever each group's own ideology, conservatives and Christians should be inherently more discriminatory on the whole. And if you're not familiar with academic writing, this is the thesis, right? This is the hypothesis, right? They're going to say, okay, this is what a lot of people might think, so let's see if it actually is true. I just want to point out that you probably already know if you've been listening to my episodes, when it says, are conservatives more prejudiced than liberals, already you know that I'm saying bad premise, right? Bad question, because we're all prejudiced, right? And we're always prejudiced about different things. And so for them to, for Matthew Hudson to pose this kind of statement, then he basically already is saying that certain things are deemed prejudicial and other things are not, right? But all of us are. And we're prejudiced about everything. If you want to get down to the level of the individual, then there are infinite number of things that people can be prejudicial about. But let's get back to the article. More recent psychological research, some of it presented in January at the annual meeting of the Society of Personality and Social Psychology, SPSP, shows that it's not so simple. These findings confirm that conservatives, liberals, the religious and the non-religious are each prejudiced against those with opposing views. But surprisingly, each group is about equally prejudiced. While liberals might think of themselves as more open-minded, they are no more tolerant of people, unlike them, that their conservative counterparts are. Okay, that's good. Let's go on. When Mark Brandt, an American-trained psychologist now at Tilburg University in the Netherlands, first entered graduate school, he wondered why members of groups that espouse tolerance are often intolerant. I realized that there was a potential contradiction in the literature, he told me. On the one hand, liberals have a variety of personality traits and moral values that should protect them from expressing prejudice. On the other hand, people tend to express prejudice against people who do not share their values. And so he's showing how two different assumptions that are often made are working against each other. Okay, so if you value open-mindedness as liberals claim to do, and you see another group as prejudiced, might their perceived prejudice actually increase your prejudice against them? And so it's kind of interesting, right? So once you, if you go back to what I said before, once you make certain assumptions and you maintain the integrity of the assumptions, you start getting these what seems to be convoluted statements, but it's actually a lot simpler than this. Okay. So Brandt approached this question with two other people. Let's see. They asked a variety of Americans about their political ideologies and how they saw other people, and basically everything came out to be the same. So one group always was just as prejudicial against the other group as the other with the other. So conservatives and liberals are both prejudicial, just prejudicial about different things, right? And obvious, that's kind of obvious, right? It's a no-brainer. And he tries then to say, okay, so if that's not the case, that what you say you believe doesn't really doesn't make you any better or worse than your opponent. So what is really going on here? And he tries to answer through empirical analysis. And this is why I really don't like sociology. A lot of it, like, you need to have some sort of data to be able to say anything, right? You can't just have a theory and have a thought experiment, right? I tried to do that when I presented a paper at a sociology conference, and I made a lot of theoretical statements based on my own empirical experience, personal. So it was anecdotal, but for me, if you have one person experience something, then you can have many people have the same experience, which means that it's something that you should look at, something that should be examined. And if that flies in the face of what a lot of people have already said and had, theories and ideas that have been accepted as being true, well, it means you need better theories, right? And people got really upset at me, right? Because I tried to basically say we need better theories, we need better methods to be able to explain all of these outliers, right? And sociology, which is based on data, outliers are basically ignored, I find. You want to focus on the majority. And of course, none of us live as a majority. We live as individuals. And so those outliers are people. And so we have to figure out what's going on there, but they hate that. And so that's why I'm not really a big fan of sociology in general. Okay, so because it's all you need data. And so the data that he had just could not provide any answers. And so then that's it, he's done. And that's what's so crazy about sociology is that, okay, I don't have data, so I can't comment on it. It's like, it's kind of weird. I'm sure it's just the people that I've hung out with, but anyway. So the first thing I want to point out with the problem with this paper, and I've already talked about how it is based on a certain premise. They have a hypothesis, and so now they're going to try to gather information, data, to either prove or disprove that hypothesis. Very simple, very straightforward. It's sort of like a simplistic science experiment, right? It really doesn't tell you much of anything. And part of the problem is that their terminology is problematic, right? They don't really define the terms that they're using. So, for example, conservative, liberal, right? And they're throwing around these words, and everyone is supposed to understand what these words mean. And really, what they're doing is they're relying on a racialization. They're relying on a generalization of an entirely too large group of people that is extremely diverse. And to say that they're all the same is just kind of weird, right? And so what we have to also acknowledge is if you get at the actual definitions, you may realize that the categories or the racializations that you're using are not even really that good, right? So a conservative is someone who does not like change. They want to conserve, right? So that's why you'll have environmental conservatories, right? So they're trying to preserve what is in what has always been. And so you don't want any change. And so a lot of people associate this with religion because a lot of religious people want to preserve tradition and the old beliefs, this is always forever going to be true. That's why they usually associate it with religious fanatics, right? They're conservatives. A liberal is someone who embraces change, right? So all change good, right? So you don't want to get in the way of change. You don't want to prevent change. You want to foster as much change as possible. And so the easiest way to know who's a conservative and who's a liberal, right? Conservatives are the people who are always trying to write new regulations, new laws for everyone else to follow. And so I would ask people in my class, I was, okay, so who in Washington, D.C. are the conservatives? right? And if you were listening carefully, you'd realize that they were all conservatives, right? The liberals, the Democrats, and the Republicans are both conservatives. I forget what I just said. I might have messed up my words. But in Washington, D.C., there are very few, you can count them on one hand, liberals. Everyone else is a conservative because they're all about passing new laws, new bills, new spending bills, and all of them work as conservation. They're trying to preserve the system as it already exists. You can tell who's a liberal because the liberal is trying to downsize government. They're trying to reduce government control in our lives. That is a true liberal. When you realize that, then among these categories that these sociologists were using, you have them on both sides. You have conservatives on both the left and the right, and you have liberals on both the left and the right. And so these two categories, these racializations of conservative and liberal, are nonsense. They will never give you really good information, which is why sociology studies like this one or this article that's talking about a whole bunch of sociological studies, there is no conclusion. It's inconclusive. Okay. I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. The actual words conservative and liberal, right? They mean different things than what most people think that they mean today. And because of that, these are fake categories. These are only self-identification or categories that other people have put them in, when in reality, right, they're only put in that category because they identify as a Christian. Anyone who knows anything about Christianity knows that not all Christians are conservative. A lot of them are barely even Christian and therefore hardly conservative at all. Okay, so there is also this underlying assumption within this article of a static life, a life that does not change, right? So all of us, we're always going to be conservative, we're always going to be liberal, we're always going to be this, and the world will never change. And so we can take a snapshot of the world and then study it. But that's not life at all, right? And so I've used the analogy of a lot of scholars pretending and studying society as if it's a picture, when in fact it's a movie, right? It's a video. It's constantly moving, it's constantly changing. And any moment that you want to describe, it's already done. It doesn't exist anymore. And this is why majors like sociology are extremely problematic. They're making suggestions and proposals for a society which no longer exists. And that's why they never achieve any of their aims, really. Okay, so also because this is not a static life, a life that never changes, what used to be cutting edge in the 60s, like, the hippies, they're mainstream now. Okay, and what was mainstream in the 60s, they're fringe, right? And you might call them cutting edge, but they're just simply fringe because they used to be mainstream, the center, and now they're fringe, weirdos, freakazoids, people who should be forgotten and ignored. How did this happen? Right. And keep in mind, too, that all of those people, mainstream, cutting edge, fringe, whatever, most of them, the vast majority of them, did not change any of their beliefs. You understand what I'm trying to say? There was no change at all, right? They're all conservatives. Their beliefs never changed. Their behaviors never changed. The things that they do never changed, really. Okay, it's still basically the same. Like I know a lot of hippies from the 60s, right? They're older now. They still believe the same stuff, right? But they think that they're still cutting edge, which is, I think, is really hilarious. But anyway, so how did it happen? How did all of this change happen? How did the cutting edge become mainstream? How did the mainstream become fringe? How did that happen when none of their beliefs really changed? It's through legislation and government subsidies. And I've harped on these two things for a while now, but legislation or laws and regulations are force, it's coercion. And so people are forced through legislation to not be allowed to make certain choices. Everyone has to do this. Everyone has to go through the sensitivity training. Everyone has to go through the required education. Everyone has to do this. Everyone has to do that, but whatever. There's no more choice. And that happens through law or force, right? And so even the thought that there were alternatives flies out of the minds of everyone. It's like, oh, I guess we have to do it now this way. And people don't realize that now, once everyone is forced to do the same thing, what happens. People think that they know what'll happen. Everyone will believe in the same things. No, not what happens, right? Second thing is the subsidy. And so when you remove choice, the one choice that you are left, it's a monopoly, which means that the expenses continue to rise, right? The cost of not allowing people to do what they want to do and forcing them to do what someone in Washington, D.C. has decided is the best for everybody, and it usually is not, right? Because the people who write the regulations are often people who are not even part of the field, right? They're just simply following whatever social trend is going on. So subsidies remove the cost of making those choices, right? So everyone has to go to public school. Oh, that's well, hey, we'll pay for it. It's invisible, right? So you're paying school taxes, but it's not a bill that you receive. It's just taxes that you have to pay, right? And so the subsidy, right, that is additional money given to all these public schools, that it comes from the state, not from the people. And so it removes a lot of the costs that people have to incur now that they're living in a monopoly, right? And so basically what's happening is through force and subsidy, there's change, right? So the cutting edge has become the mainstream has become fringe. The question is then, what would people have chosen if they were actually given if they were given the actual price tags of all of these different choices, and if they were free to choose whatever it is that they wanted? Okay. And so the fact that people are being forced to do this or that, it is not a surprise that there's so much fighting and arguing, okay? Because people are using force to get what they want, and everyone is unhappy, right? It doesn't matter, right, what you're fighting for. That's irrelevant. It's beside the point. The fact is that people are being forced to do and believe things that they do not want to do or believe. And why is that? Why is it that so many people who are into this kind of activity, why are they like that? Why is it so difficult to have a conversation with them? I think it's because of a lack of introspection, a lack of remembering of how one looked, how one behaved, how one spoke when they were younger. And remembering how wrong they were, how they misunderstood things, how they got things wrong and then did stupid things, right? And that's most of us. Some people have really good advice, very, very intuitive, and they were able to see what would happen and they didn't do it, right? Unfortunately, my roommate and myself, we were not two of those people, okay? But that was the thing. My conversation with my old college roommate, it was like we just graduated a couple weeks ago, not 38 years ago. All right. And our conversation was just so much fun. Right. And what I noticed was that each of us both were kind of embarrassed about some of the things that we did when we were in college together. Right. So we kept talking about our failings, the things that we screwed up, the things that we didn't do right. Right. And what was funny was that each of us in turn said, oh, no, you were a lot better than that. Right. And so, in other words, we had complimentary things to say about each other while we were really getting down on ourselves. And I thought that was really interesting, right? In other words, we remembered each other better than how we remembered ourselves, right? And I think that's why we got along, because we remembered all of our screw ups. We remembered all the embarrassing, shameful, perhaps things that we did when we were younger, things that we would never, like, if we found out our kids were doing that, we'd be kind of upset. We'd be like, oh, I don't want to ever hear that again, that kind of thing. But we recognized that it was pretty stupid, that we probably shouldn't have done that, right? And we were repentant, right? We said, oh, we can't do that again. We can't continue to live this way. We got to grow, right? And I think this is how we were able to have a conversation, because we remembered being subjective idiots, right? Being selfish, only concerned with our own narrow subjectivity. Learning the lessons of your youth, you become more open-minded. You're less coercive because you understand how people could say, and do the things that they said and did, right? And you kind of understand where they're coming from, and you kind of want to guide them because you know better now, right? And so, but unfortunately, you can to get to that point is really difficult, right? Because people are yelling at you, right? I came up with a couple of ways, but it requires a lot of time. But anyway, and I've shared some of it already on this channel. But can this attitude be taught, right? Of introspection, of realizing that you were wrong and admitting it, right? Coming clean and saying, I was an idiot, I'm sorry. Is this inherent? Is it genetic? Is it socialized? Who knows? Is it a result of all the medications that we're forced to take these days, all those shots and jabs? Well, we can only try to figure out a way to have people do some soul searching. I know I've tried and it never worked. I was like, hey, so are you going to come clean? Are you going to admit that you were wrong? Never. They never do. In religion, at least in Christianity, the way that I practice it, repentance is key. Like you got to realize you screwed up. And without it, you can't change. You can't change without it. Probably in the secular world, it's admission of being wrong. Without it, you can't change. You cannot broaden your subjectivity. You cannot sort of mitigate your anger and your rage and your outrage. You can't do it unless you start admitting that you were wrong in what you did. And I think this will resonate with some of you. You might see some sense in it. But yeah, I encourage you to come up with strategies to be able to get other people, particularly people you're having a problem with, to be able to see that, be patient, and like you don't have to respond in the level of tone and attitude. You just have to try to get that person to see when they were wrong, to admit that they were wrong, and things will change. That's it for this episode. Sorry for it went a little bit long, but didn't want to leave anything out. I'll talk to you next time.